Good morning, everyone. I am Tom Keene. I'm the Associate Administrator for Research and Registration with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. I want to thank you for getting up relatively early and being at this first session. Hopefully some of you were in our session yesterday. We were talking about our efforts to modernize our motor carrier registration system. Today is a much broader set of updates from FMCSA. We appreciate you being here. We want this. We'll talk about some of our grant programs, entry-level driver training, and then if there's time, I'll finish up with some discussions of our recent large truck crash trends, if there's time. But first, I'd like to introduce our Acting Deputy Administrator, Sue Lawless. Sue is the Acting Deputy Administrator for the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. She is also our Executive Director and Chief Safety Officer. She's an attorney by training and began her career representing motor carriers and drivers in various legal issues. And she joined FMCSA more than 10 years ago. And since that time has worked on a variety of safety-related issues in our policy office and our Chief Counsel's office. So please join me in welcoming Sue to the stage.
Thanks, Tom, and good morning. I echo my thanks to you for being here this morning, and I'm very excited to be here as well. I appreciate you attending this session and know that your time is valuable, and the fact that you took time to come here demonstrates your commitment to safety and patience, because let's face it, there are a lot more exciting things to do here at MATS rather than listening to government employees talk about regulations and priorities, so thank you. And I'm glad you came, because you're the reason we're here, and we need your participation to help us do our job effectively. We all need to work together if we want to live in a world where nobody dies on the roads. I've brought a few FMCSA team members to give you information on the important things that FMCSA is doing to make sure that our roads are safe for you and for others. Because we all know that drivers deliver everything that we touch and see, and there is not a single person in this country who does not benefit from the work that drivers do every single day. Day in, day out, drivers and motor carriers move the goods and make the deliveries that keep this country moving and our economy strong. So thank you again. At FMCSA, we strongly believe, and I personally believe, that if you are safe at work, then our roadways will be safe because of it. Yesterday, we had a public meeting of FMCSA's Truck Leasing Task Force here at MATS, and that task force was established by Congress to look at unsafe leasing practices and see if there's anything that the federal government can do to address those issues. The task force is made up of your peers, motor carriers, owner-operators, labor organizations, consumer protection groups, educators, and others who volunteer their time and provide recommendations to us at the end of their charter. We appreciate hearing from you and getting a better understanding of the challenges you face, and then hearing your recommendations for how to address them. But the Truck Leasing Task Force is just one of the things that we are doing and efforts that are underway to understand and address the outside forces that can impact a driver's workplace. For example, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or bill, provided a once-in-a-generation investment in safety and was enacted at a time when there was a historic spotlight on how critical truck drivers are to the country's supply chain. So we have been looking at a lot of things, including using bill resources to address the core issues impacting a driver's workplace, such as availability of safe parking, detention time, compensation, and how those issues relate to safety. For example, the bill provided millions in federal grant funding that is helping states add hundreds of additional parking spaces for CMVs and to help drivers more easily find safe parking. Over the last 7 years, through FMCSA technology transfer funds to states, the Innovative Technology Deployment Grant Program has awarded $9.7 million to 7 states for a total of 10 truck parking projects. These projects include a variety of technologies like cameras, sensors, license plate readers, other things designed to help drivers manage and find available truck parking spaces. And at FMCSA, we are also analyzing the available data on safety and data from connected trucks to identify where there is most demand and need for parking, and how to best target solutions and resources. We know that truck parking remains a safety and overall quality of life issue for drivers, and it remains a priority for us to partner across the industry to help ease and eventually eliminate the challenge. We have also launched a driver compensation and driver detention time study. Those are two separate studies to address other factors that may make it difficult to sustain a career as a truck driver. And I'm also proud, and personally proud, to talk about the great work of the Women of Trucking Advisory Board, another effort made possible by Bill. This work helps us understand the challenges that women face becoming a driver and also in this industry, and how we can help get more women into this industry. The board recently wrapped up its 12-month study and prepared a report. That report will be published on our website, and then after that we will be looking at those recommendations, trying to figure out what we can do to address those recommendations, and then providing a report to Congress, letting Congress know what we will be doing. Yesterday, we also hosted a session to provide an update on FMCSA's new registration system, as Tom talked about, and our fraud prevention efforts. We are developing a new registration system to improve the transparency, efficiency, and user experience with the agency's registration systems, and to reduce fraud in the registration process. I hope that you are making plans. I talked to Ken Riddle yesterday, who is leading these efforts, to join our next stakeholder day in May. So those stakeholder days are where we bring in people who are going to be using those systems and have them user test those systems and kind of validate whether what we are doing is doing what we think it should be doing. So you have an opportunity to come and engage with those systems in real time, to look at how the programming is being developed. And I do strongly encourage you to look for that notice, to participate in those sessions, because that will help us know whether the work that we are doing is what you need it to do. I want to quickly just touch on a couple of priorities before turning it back to Tom. What we are working on, we are always working to understand prevention. If we can understand prevention, then we have the ability to understand how and why crashes happen and to prevent them from happening. We're looking at root causes. All of the things that I'm talking about, driver compensation, driver leasing, are helping us understand why crashes happen. We also are undertaking a large truck crash causal factor study, and that will ultimately help us have a more granular understanding of the factors that can lead to crashes. We're always looking to leverage technology and to modernize technology to make the road safer. We continue to look for ways to encourage the adoption of technology that can prevent crashes. So we're looking at beyond compliance approaches and other ways to encourage motor carriers and drivers to use technology that makes sense for them and makes the road safer. We remain focused on closing loopholes in our regulations, so continuing to work on improvements to our registration, vetting, auditing the CDL process and drug and alcohol programs. We're also working on helping understand and tell the story of why we do what we do, so that people and the public has a better engagement with our agency and can participate in a meaningful way in the processes. Last but not least, grants. Grants are a big part of our funding and a big part of the bill funding for us. We want to make the most of our funding. We have Patrick Neiman's here today who will talk to you a little bit about the grants process, but just at a very high level, we have $180 million plus in grant funding this year. We just recently launched our Notice of Funding Opportunities. I encourage you to go to the agency's website and look at those funding opportunities. There are a number of opportunities to enhance CMV safety and also for CDL and other driver training. All of this work supports the broader U.S. Department of Transportation and National Roadway Safety Strategy, which sets the vision for zero fatalities on our nation's roadways and outlines the specific steps we will take to advance towards this goal. Thanks again for taking the time to be here, and I'll turn it back over to Tom, who will introduce our team. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sue. And again, if you were at the session yesterday, and one of the points that Sue talked about was the unique nature of this bipartisan infrastructure law, which was passed by Congress 2 years ago, or if you prefer the term IJA, the acronym for the bill. What's unique about that bill was, as Sue said, it provided new funding for new initiatives. So obviously our mission is preventing large truck and bus crashes on U.S. highways. But what Congress told us in this bill was stretch a little further here and start focusing on some of these other issues in the industry, detention time, take a look at and study compensation methods by way of an independent transportation research board, set up this truck leasing task force, study that issue. So to Congress's credit and in support of all the important work that you all do as professional drivers in the industry, see if we could educate and maybe solve some of these broader issues that you're facing day to day that make your job so tough. So I appreciate Sue covering all of that. Next up is a rulemaking update by our Associate Administrator for Policy, Larry Miner. Larry has been with the agency for 35 years. His office is responsible for strategic planning, program evaluation, and then of course rulemaking development and issuance. Larry has degrees in physics and mechanical engineering, and I know you've been here several times, Larry, so many of these people probably know you. Please welcome Larry to the podium for a rulemaking update.
Good morning, everyone. Good to be back here again amongst all of you to give you an update on some of the things that we're working on the regulatory front at FMCSA. And I wanted to start off by touching on something that you just heard the acting deputy administrator talk about, the National Roadway Safety Strategy. And the Secretary's team, when they came on board, one of the things that they did was to look at the roadway fatality numbers over recent years and see the alarming upward trend in those fatality numbers. And not just the overall fatality numbers, but the truck and bus fatality numbers as well. And what the department did was to develop a national roadway safety strategy that we first rolled out in the early part of 2022 to identify the things that the surface transportation agencies would be focusing on, and to also identify the things that we want our state partners working with us to focus on, and to identify opportunities for the private sector as well to work with us to drive down those overall highway fatality numbers with the long-term goal of getting down to zero. And we know it's going to take a lot of hard work and a lot of time, but that is our long-term goal, is to get down to zero, because none of these fatalities have to happen. And we're going to work with you to keep working to get those numbers down. And part of the thing that we're focusing on is a safe system approach, looking at safer people. What are the things that we can do to get better decisions by all the roadway users, including the truck and bus drivers, the passenger car drivers, the motorcycle riders, the bicyclists, all the roadway users? What are the things we can do for safer people? And if you look at that safer people icon, you'll see the seatbelt symbol, and that's something that's really important for this audience, because out of the approximately 6,000 truck and bus related fatalities that happen, about 1,000 of those are truck occupant fatalities, and a large percent of those truck occupant fatalities involve people not wearing their seatbelts. So we want to encourage all of you to fasten the seatbelt, because those are a lot of fatalities that could have been prevented if only the truck occupants were properly fastened in. Looking at safer vehicles, what are some of the technologies that we can use to help prevent these crashes and their fatalities? And we'll talk about things like automatic emergency braking as far as safer vehicles. Looking at safer speeds, what are the things that we can do to get all the roadway users to slow it down a little bit? I guess I hit the podium a little too hard there. So safer speeds, getting everyone to slow down a bit. Safer roads, looking at some of the infrastructure issues, whether it's just introducing bicycle lanes, traffic common areas, and better lighting on the roadways, but safer roads. And post-crash care, because sometimes it's not the impact of the crash that results in a fatality, it's some of the delays in getting the crash victims to the medical treatment facilities. So that's the safe system approach that we're talking about in the National Roadway Safety Strategy. And we encourage all of you to visit our DOT website and to learn more about the safe system approach and what we're doing with the National Roadway Safety Strategy. because we did make updates to it in 2023 and again in 2024 as we learn more by working with stakeholders and the industry and our state partners. So we encourage you to learn more about that. And among the things that we're highlighting in those updates to the National Roadway Safety Strategy, you heard the Acting Deputy Administrator talk about our Women of Trucking Advisory Board, where we're looking at some of the issues concerning the recruitment and retention of women in trucking, and to make sure that they are treated in a fair and equitable manner as far as career advancement, and to make sure that they are safe working in the industry. So the WOTAB has finished all their deliberations, and the agency is currently working on its report to Congress that's due in November of this year. So we encourage you to visit the WOTAB website, where you can look at all the discussion notes from their series of meetings and some of the things they highlighted, and you can learn more about the things that they think are important for addressing the issues involving the recruitment and the retention of women in trucking. And also our truck leasing task force just had a meeting yesterday to talk about some of the issues impacting drivers on the lease purchase agreements for vehicles, and things that could be done to help better inform the drivers so that they can make well-informed decisions and not become victims to predatory leasing agreements. So there's a link for the truck leasing task force, and you can look at their discussion notes from some of their previous meetings and visit the website to look at their schedule for future meetings. And now I'll talk briefly about some of the rulemakings that we're prioritizing for the remainder of this calendar year. Starting off with automatic emergency braking, which ties in with our National Roadway Safety Strategy, and it's also a mandate under the bipartisan infrastructure legislation. We're looking at technology that would kick in to stop the vehicle automatically. So if you're approaching a crash imminent event where the vehicle is closing in too fast on an object in the roadway, that the brakes would apply automatically. And if the driver does not appear to be applying the brakes hard enough to avoid the crash, then the technology would apply the brakes more aggressively to avoid the crash. And this is a joint rulemaking that we're doing with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, where the NHTSA folks, their piece of it is the manufacturing specifications that all the original equipment manufacturers or OEMs would have to do to install automatic emergency braking on the new vehicles that they're building. And the FMCSA part of the rulemaking is to require the fleets that purchase these new vehicles to maintain the automatic emergency braking to ensure that we get the safety outcomes that we hope to achieve through this technology. We published the notice of proposed rulemaking last year and got lots of thoughtful comments from a lot of you that are in this room probably about the concerns that you have with the technology and its durability, reliability, and maintainability. And now we are looking at putting out a final rule later this year to set the compliance date for having automatic emergency braking on commercial motor vehicles. And just to give you a quick glance at what this technology will do, you have the sensors and cameras on board to detect when things are in the roadway, and using all the algorithms to detect whether we're closing in too quickly on that object, and then to apply the brakes automatically. So this technology has been around for a few years, and some of the OEMs already provided as an option on their new vehicles. But with this rulemaking, we'll be setting uniform minimum standards for the technology, so there'll be greater consistency in how it performs. And another important vehicle-related rulemaking that we're working on is the safe integration of automated driving systems, or ADS, and that's where we would have some technology, or the private sector is developing technology that will enable them to take the driver out of the driver's seat under certain scenarios. So making sure that there are some safety guardrails in place, so that as long as the private sector is developing this technology to have vehicles that can drive themselves on public roads and up and down the highways at full highway speed, we think it's very important to have some safety oversight to make sure that it's done in a safe and responsible manner. We had published an advanced notice of proposed rulemaking a couple of years ago, where we asked a series of questions to get some feedback from all of you. And then we followed up with a supplemental advanced notice of proposed rulemaking, because we were learning more and more about the technology and wanted to get some additional feedback from you. Now we're at the stage where we have drafted a notice of proposed rulemaking. It's under review at the Office of Management and Budget, and it's been there since December. So in the not too distant future, you can look forward to seeing that notice of proposed rulemaking out on the street. And we will strongly encourage all of you to look at that very carefully and to see whether that addresses any safety concerns that you may have, and to give us your feedback on anything that you think we may have left out, and to participate in that rulemaking process. So please look forward to that opportunity to help us out. And the third rulemaking that I wanted to highlight today is transparency in broker transactions. This is something where we got a lot of feedback from the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association, as well as the Small Business and Transportation Coalition, where they think that we need to update our regulations to provide greater transparency in broker transactions, because as we learned in recent years, you believe that some of the brokers are not being forthright in their dealings with you, and that they are perhaps taking a little bit more out of the transaction than they should. So this is a rulemaking where we made the commitment to move forward with a notice of proposed rulemaking to address the concerns about broker transparency. And for those of you who've been monitoring this at our website, you'll see that our current schedule, we're estimating that we would have a notice of proposed rulemaking out on the street by October of this year. And when that notice of proposed rulemaking hits the street, we certainly encourage all of you to share your thoughts and opinions on whether you think we've got a good, solid approach for improving broker transparency. And I wanted to give you the link so that you can monitor all of the government's regulatory activities, reginfo.gov, and there's where you can see the unified agenda, not just for FMCSA's rulemaking actions, but for the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Federal Highway Administration, all of our DOT agencies, as well as the rest of the executive branch. You can visit reginfo.gov to see what's happening. And if you visit that website, you can also drill down to see what's the status of any rulemakings that we've submitted to the Office of Management and Budget for review. You'll see a link buried deep in their website where you can check on the status of the rulemakings that are under review by the Office of Management and Budget. And also one of my favorite links, the Federal Register website, so that when you hear about a rulemaking being published, here's the website that you can go to where you can actually pull up a copy of that rulemaking notice and read it for yourself to see what you think about what the agency has said. And regulations.gov, and this is one that I definitely want you to bookmark. And this provides you the opportunity to actually submit comments to our rulemaking, so that after you've heard about it, after you have a chance to read about it, here's where you can go to submit your comments and tell us what you think about it and give us your feedback. And when you go to regulations.gov, you get to see the detailed paperwork that the agency has prepared. So you've seen the notice of proposed rulemaking or other rulemaking document, and you can actually see our regulatory analyses there. So when we tell you what we think the safety benefits will be from the rulemaking and what we think that this could potentially cost each of your fleets, here's your chance to give us feedback whether you think we got it right. So if we come up with an estimate that we think it's going to cost you $500 a year to comply with the rule, but based on your firsthand experience and everything you've done, you think it's more like $5,000 a year, here's your opportunity to tell us what you think the impacts of the rulemaking is going to be on your business. And if we think that this is not going to have a significant impact on a substantial number of small businesses, but based on your experience, you totally disagree, this is your opportunity to give us feedback. And when you visit this website, you'll get to see what all the other commenters have submitted, so that if you think your neighbor across the street got it totally wrong when they sent the comments and that they're full of it, here's your chance to give us that feedback as well. So you can give us lots of feedback, and if you have concerns, but you just don't want your name in that docket, you may submit comments anonymously. And if you have confidential business information that you don't want the public to see, we do have a process that's spelled out in those Federal Register notices for how you go about submitting confidential business information that you want us to consider it, but you don't want your neighbors to see all the detailed financial information or other proprietary information that you have. There's a separate process where you can submit confidential business information to us, and we will have a redacted copy of the document in the docket, and the public will not see the confidential information. So we strongly encourage all of you to participate in the rulemaking process, and don't worry about overwhelming us with thousands and thousands of comments, that we have the bandwidth to look at thousands and thousands and thousands of comments. We want to get as many of you as possible to engage in the rulemaking process, so that you really have to make an informed decision about what's going to be in a final rule. We have the input from all of you that we can actually consider it. So I just want to make sure that you are aware of the opportunities to participate and give us your feedback. And last, of course, a shameless plug for our FMCSA website. So we strongly encourage you to always visit that to see all the regulatory and non-regulatory activities we have going on, and to help give us feedback on how we can work together as partners to improve safety. And with that, I thank you for your time and attention, and I think Tom is going to take over again for the introduction.
All right, thank you, Larry. And as Larry said, the regulatory development system is not built for speed, but that's by design. It's built to maximize public input, so we encourage you to provide your input by way of those resources Larry provided. Okay, I'm going to hold questions for now, just so we can get through all the presentations, and then we'll leave the last portion of the session for any questions from the audience. Our next speaker, Patrick Niemans, is our Director of Safety Programs at FMCSA. Within his portfolio includes FMCSA grants, you heard Sue reference that, as well as the CDL compliance regulations, entry-level driver training regulations as a part of that, as well as our state enforcement training program for our state police and divisions of public safety partners at the state level. Patrick has 24 years in the U.S. Department of Transportation with multiple modes, and he has a PhD in political science and a master's in business administration. Please join me in welcoming Patrick to the podium.
Okay, good morning, Max. How are you guys doing? How are you guys doing today? All right. I didn't know if you're awake or not. How many drivers do we have in the audience? Raise your hand. I would just like to say thank you for your service to America. Let's see how we advance this. I think Larry had knocked that off there. There we go. So let's talk a little bit about entry-level driver training. Growing up, we all heard knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. For those vintage folks out there like myself, you probably remember when you woke up on Saturday, you saw this thing. Yes, I said vintage. I didn't want to insult anyone. You woke up on Saturday mornings and you watched this great show, and it's still in my head to this day. It was called Schoolhouse Rock. How many of you guys remember that? Junction, and it just stuck in your head. And those are things that you remember to this day. So when I'm writing sentences, sometimes I think about the conjunctions. So with our entry-level driver training, it's training as well. Going back to that knowledge is power. With entry-level driver training, we set these standards starting in 2016. And we wanted to set minimum standards for training to receive your commercial driver's license. Larry talked about rulemaking. In most cases, we put the NPRMs out and we get these comments and so forth. Well, we started out like that in this process. However, we went through a process called negotiated rulemaking, where we worked with the industry so that we could come up with the best rule possible. And that rule went into effect in February of 2022. Who's covered, or what does entry-level driver training cover? Remember, minimum training standards to receive your commercial driver's license. It affects and it covers individuals who are newly seeking their commercial driver's license. A or B, an upgrade of their license, or for new endorsements such as an HP or an S. Now, with the entry-level driver training rule, we have a set of training providers. Those training providers are going to provide the training to those new commercial drivers. But first, we want to make sure that you are registered on our training provider registry, which is called our TPR. This is a self-certification as a provider. When you go in, you certify to the stipulations that are set forth, and you will then be listed on our training provider registry. Currently, we have just over 20,000 providers, and out of those 20,000 providers, we have about 37,000 locations. Those 20,000 providers may have multiple sites. They may use or choose multiple modes, such as online and in person. When we put this rule forward, one of the things that we heard was, well, to get a CDL, it costs a lot of money. And if I'm a carrier, you're now telling me I'm going to have to send my new folks and I'm going to have to make sure they get trained and I'm going to have to spend all this money to make that happen. Well, remember we talked about self-certification. So if you are a carrier, you could self-certify your training person within your company to provide the training and simply register on our training provider registry. And as you see here, the large number of our providers come from motor carriers. That was my Schoolhouse Rock moment for ELDT. Let's talk a little bit about grants. Acting Deputy Administrator Lawless talked a little bit about that and alluded to what we have with grants. So, you know, I see this as when I go across the country and I'm talking about the opportunities that we have at FMCSA, I kind of think of it like, let's use March Madness right now. You know when you go to a basketball game and the cheer team comes out and they have that t-shirt cannon and you're like, yeah, I never catch the t-shirt, so I'm not even going to try. And then it hits you in your head. And you're like, well, maybe I should have tried. That's kind of how I look at our grants. People think, well, it's not for me. There's no possible way I'm going to get this grant. It's very competitive. But out of the bipartisan infrastructure law, FMCSA over the 5-year period has $3.2 billion. So here is a list of our grants program within the agency. The MICSAP grant is a formula program that we provide funds to our state partners. Those are typically our roughly 12,000 law enforcement officers that assist us with roadside inspections. We then have our high priority grants, commercial motor vehicle, innovative technology deployment, which Larry Shop does a lot of work in that. That's a lot of research. And then our enforcement training and support grant. That's where we train those law enforcement officers and others that assist us. Then we have our commercial driver's license program implementation grant. And then we have our commercial motor vehicle operator safety training program. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on all of those, but I want to highlight one. The Commercial Motor Vehicle Operator Safety Training Program grant, or we call it CMVOST. Some folks say CMVOST. Whatever it is, it's money. Now, we talked earlier about entry-level driver training, but we look at this particular grant as our sweetheart grant. It is our smallest grant, roughly $3 million. Here's where it's a sweetheart grant, because it changes the lives of people. Basically, it pays for you to go to school to get your commercial driver's license. Entities that can apply for this are community colleges, vocational schools, trucking schools, and we set this up for our military members, veterans, their spouse, underserved communities, and our refugee community. This is something that we've had the privilege where Secretary Buttigieg has gone to at least 3 of our locations that received this grant to congratulate them and award the grant to them. So if you're interested or know of someone that's interested, please have them take a look at our grant opportunity here. Again, getting hit in the head by that t-shirt because you didn't know the process, here's the application process. One of the things that I would encourage you to do if you're interested in applying, go to grants.gov and it will walk you through the process. Our acting deputy administrator mentioned earlier that we just released our notice of funding opportunities on March 4th. That will lay out all of the requirements that's needed to apply for our grants. Now, I've never applied for a grant. I don't know what it is. I don't know how to do it. If you visit our FMCSA Technical Assistance website, it will lay all of that out for you. We have videos. We have tutorials. We have examples. So you are not alone in this process. And we will host various webinars. So please make sure you take a look at our website. With that said, thank you for your time.
you, Patrick. We do have a little time, so I will cover some recent trends that we've seen as it relates to large truck and bus crashes. Not the most uplifting topic in the morning, but an incredibly important one. And really, we just want to share trends with you, the drivers, to help keep you safe on the road so you get home safely and what we're seeing. Larry mentioned one example earlier about seatbelt use, and I'll go into a little more detail with these slides. First, just a slide on the data sources. This is National Highway Traffic Safety Administration data, what we call the Fatality Analysis Reporting System. This identifies large trucks and buses in the data. And the value of this data set, what you may have heard termed as FARS, is the incredible amount of detail on contributing factors, related factors like roadway condition. It's got a lot of detail in there that we can really drill down in. The limitation of the data is that because there's so much detail, it tends to lag in terms of its release. So I'll be showing you data through 2021, which unfortunately was a high point in terms of large truck and bus fatalities. Partly that's a function of the go-go period of the supply chain challenges post-pandemic, which many of you or all of you were a part of. But nonetheless, it was really a high point in terms of large truck and bus fatalities on U.S. roadways. This should be of no surprise to anybody in the audience. These dots are fatal crashes on a national map at the national level. The blue dots are large truck fatal crashes, and the orange dots are bus or motor coach crashes. And then in the rare event that there's a large truck and a bus involved in a fatal crash, those are those yellow dots. Obviously, this tracks very closely with the extent of the highway network, which is east of the Mississippi primarily, as well as population, which is where you're typically hauling freight. So, majority east of the Mississippi. The blue chart here, the blue portion of the chart shows total crashes involving large trucks and buses. In sort of just a count. And this is a 25, 30, with actually more than 30 years of data. You can see over time, it's remained relatively steady. We had a dip right after the Great Recession in 2008. No surprise there in terms of economic growth, movement of freight, but also 2007 was the introduction of the iPhone. I don't think that's coincidental here, which is after the Great Recession, we saw an uptick in the fatality count involving large trucks and buses, as we did for passenger vehicles across the nation. What's relatively unique is the orange line here. These are large truck and bus fatalities normalized by the amount of vehicle miles traveled in the country. So, it's a relative success story in one respect. If you look back to 1970, 75, it is a downward trend, significant downward trend in highway fatalities involving large trucks and buses. If you look at the rate, what's different is after the Great Recession. We've seen not only the count go up, but the rate, and that normalizes by how much highway travel there is. That has also gone up since that time, which is an alarming trend for us overall in the nation. Not every state has seen this upward trend. There are some success stories in individual states, but the majority of states, if we look at this by the state level, have shown increases. This chart just looks at fatal crash involvement by class of truck. Those are probably small numbers. Hopefully you can see those in the back. I've tried to highlight those in two areas. I assume most folks in this room are, as professional drivers, are driving the Class 7, Class 8 vehicles, 26,000 pounds and above. Those are still, because of the exposure on the roadway, those are still about 70% of all large trucks involved in fatal crashes across the United States. But another alarming trend that we've seen in the last several years, and you see it here for the last 2017 to 2021, are Class 3 trucks. Those, for example, Ford F-350s hauling an auto trailer. Those are growing significantly, 25% plus in the last 5 years. So just in the 1 year trend, you see it's up 17% at the bottom of the chart from 2020 to 2021. And this is something a lot of states have started. The state police forces or the divisions of public safety have started specific roadside enforcement campaigns targeted at these Class 3 trucks where they're seeing extensive growth. I think of Nevada in particular. They have a very specialized program for Class 3 trucks now. So if you do operate Class 3 trucks, just be aware of this. This is a concerning trend in the last 5 years. This is the point that Larry made earlier, and I just want to hit this carefully here. These are large truck occupant fatalities since 2005, but I'll focus on the last 5 years. This is 25% plus increase in large truck occupant fatalities, mostly the drivers. Occasionally it may be a passenger in the truck, but mostly it's the driver in the truck. And we've seen this grow on track with that earlier slide, or even more in the last 5 years. And this concerns us, and I'll show you why in the next slide. Look at that top line of the chart. This is belt usage or restraint usage by the large truck occupant as investigated by the officer on the scene in the post-crash investigation. And you see that top line where it says, was a restraint device used? None. It's 41%. It's 41% that the victim in the crash, the large truck occupant, was not wearing a seatbelt at the time of that fatal crash. Obviously, no one plans to be in a crash. When you leave on your run that day, everybody expects to drive safely, but stuff happens unexpectedly, and that seatbelt can literally save your life. There were I highlighted this, there's another 17% of these cases that were investigated by the on-scene officer where they just weren't sure if a belt was being used. They just couldn't tell from the crash reconstruction. So that's potentially 58% of the victims in these fatal crashes involving large trucks and buses were not wearing their restraint device. That's I understand the belt's sometimes uncomfortable. You're in the truck, you're getting in and out all day. But this, to me, is an easy countermeasure, relatively easy countermeasure to bringing down that number. Another area I just wanted to highlight for you was traveling through work zones. Large trucks are 10% of the entire vehicle fleet across the United States, passenger vehicles being the other 90%. Large trucks and buses are involved in 13% of all fatal crashes on the highway system. So a little overrepresented relative to the vehicle fleet. But in work zones, large trucks are involved in 35% of all fatal crashes. Now, this isn't about fault. Listen, I know you're probably careful when you run through a work zone, and there's sometimes law enforcement at the front end of that, or there's automated speed cameras, just asking you to be cognizant and aware when you enter a work zone that large trucks are way overrepresented in work zone fatal crashes. And let me just show you on the next slide these top two lines. So I mentioned it's not about fault, it's not about who's responsible. You can see the most common reason for a fatal crash in a work zone is the passenger vehicle rear-ending the large truck. It's 40% of the cases we saw in the last slide. The next most frequent reason is a large truck striking a passenger vehicle. Not rear end, but maybe on the side to side. We know these work zones are tight, We know the lanes change relatively quickly. There are shifts there. Just asking you to be cognizant of this as you enter work zones, what's going on. I know you are careful. I know you're aware of this. This is just really reiterating the point that work zones are very dangerous for large trucks. And then here's, again, I talked about the value of this data, this FARS data from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, because of the details in terms of the contributing factors. And this just reiterates, in the last 3 years, the most common contributing factors in large truck and bus fatal crashes, it's speed. Speed kills, and we just ask you to watch your speed. This is consistently in the top 3, along with distraction, use of a cell phone while driving. These things are cognitive distractions, or they're physical distractions because the truck driver is on the phone at the time of the fatal crash. Now again, this isn't about fault, but these are contributing factors in the crash. So there are a lot of elements involved in the series of actions that lead to the critical reason for that fatal crash at that time. And as I said, all of these are unexpected when you're on the roadway. Maybe it's the passenger vehicle's fault, but maybe because you were on the cell phone or distracted, you didn't react quickly enough. I just wanted to bring that to your attention. And in complete fairness to you, looking at the top 10 driver-related factors for the passenger vehicle drivers involved in fatal crashes, it's also speed. It's also impairment. Impairment always shows up in the top 3 for passenger vehicle drivers. Obviously a lot less so for professional truck drivers, but it does happen. It's greater than 0. And then distraction, careless driving, inattention in the case of the passenger vehicle driver. So we bring these things to your attention just as reminders. Be careful in work zones. Please wear your seatbelt. It's an easy way to avoid being involved in a fatal crash. And if you drive a Class 3 vehicle, recognize that this is a growing area for us, and watch your speed, please. We do care about all of you. We want you to get home every night. We know how tough your jobs are. We just want you to operate safely. So thanks for your time. And I think we have a few minutes. We could take some questions. If I can just get over to the mic there. Or is there a mic in the audience for the audience if they have a question? And there's my contact information. If we don't get to your questions or you think of something afterwards as it relates to this crash data, you can email me, or we have a crash data analytics division with a mailbox. You can ask any questions you want. We're happy to help, even if it's technical assistance or more information on any of these slides. Okay, first question.
Hello, there we go. Hi, Taylor Santiago, MTM Trucking Logistics. We are a woman and carrier company. We have a fleet size of 25 dry vans. We are at that point where we are ready to grow and expand and on that brink of becoming a medium-sized company. One of the challenges we face is the driver recruitment. With being a small company, we're not a Schneider or a Cowan, and with drivers coming on recruitment-wise, our lowest tenure driver is about 3 years. Majority of our drivers come in through referrals, and we hate having to turn them away because our insurance company requires a minimum of 2 years experience. I was wondering, for those small companies that can't hire the drivers coming right out of school that even may have a great personality, work ethic, is there some type of quality program or credibility that the FMCSA recommends, or we can put a new driver through so that insurance feels safe allowing us to hire them?
talked to companies that are participating in our under 21 program about what they do to make the insurance company feel that they can use those drivers. So an even less experienced driver that doesn't even meet the minimum requirement. So they invest a lot in technology. So in every opportunity that they can to show the insurance company that they are going above and beyond what the federal regulations require. So to the extent that you can show them that you have above and beyond training for those drivers, that you have a mentorship program for those drivers, that you are using technology that can assist those drivers who may be less experienced in getting the skills that they need to become drivers. I have heard from motor carriers that that helps them with the insurance, but the reality is that the insurance companies are going to do what the insurance companies are going to do, and we've heard, and I've heard repeatedly, that the insurance has kind of been progressively creeping up and is very expensive and more difficult to get. So I appreciate your struggle, but there are things that I have heard that could potentially help you work with your insurer to show them that you are going above and beyond. Because what they're working from is this axiom that we all know that the more experienced the driver is, they tend to be more safe. And so that's less of a risk for the insurance company. But what you want to be able to demonstrate to them is that you are doing a vetting of that driver and additional training above and beyond what the federal regulations require to get them to feel more comfortable with the risk that you're presenting to them. That's what I recommend.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Sue, because a number of insurance companies were more comfortable with our under 21 pilot program, driver pilot program, because of specific technologies in the truck, as Sue mentioned, inward-facing cameras. A lot of insurance companies were much more comfortable insuring the participants in that program because of the inward-facing and outward-facing cameras. And a lot of fleets use them, and they swear by them. I recognize there's a driver acceptance issue there, but the insurance companies recognize the proven safety benefits of those technologies. So to Sue's point, that may help.
How's it going? My name is Josh Rickards, and I'm a small fleet owner as well, and a driver. We spend a lot of time out on the road, daily operations, but we do not spend a lot of time getting to speak with all of you. So, a tad bit nervous, but kind of going over this real quick. I had a question, just wanted to read this, which ties in with the question. This was put together by, the source is J.J. Keller, and this is based on FMCSA audits in the year 2022. And so my question is, and just going over this, there were 12,500 audits that were performed in 2022. And you know, we, of course, you know the statistical data. There's a lot of carriers, and we're talking a lot of fleets out there. And of the audits that were performed in 2022, 95% of the 12,500 investigations ended up in violations. And so my question is, what is the FMCSA, like, how does the FMCSA look at that? And what are they doing to ramp up that enforcement? If you're putting out regulations, where's the enforcement on that? And of course, I understand that there's resources and the amount of agents and officers to perform these audits, but that would be my questions. What is the FMCSA doing to ramp up those resources? How do they look at that data? And how does that tie into keeping roadways safe, et cetera, et cetera? Of course, my question could go on, but I just wanted to stop it there.
No, I appreciate the question. So it is not a secret that we are outnumbered, that there are more of you than there are of us, and there always will be. So we always look at ways that we can leverage the resources that we have. One thing that has happened with the bill funding is we have received additional resources to hire investigators. So we are hiring additional investigators to be able to have contact with more motor carriers, more drivers. But we are also looking at other opportunities that we have to target who we're looking at more effectively. So if you look at our website, you will see that we have proposed updating the SMS methodology so that we are, if you have data that's showing that there is really no need for us to come and look at you, that we are not going to look at you. We are updating our information system, so our roadside inspection system, to better understand which trucks we should be looking at, which drivers we should inspect. I don't think there's ever going to come a day where there will be a one-for-one inspection or investigation of every single motor carrier or driver. So what we have to do is figure out who are the companies that present the most crash risk and target those companies for investigation. We are also looking at, we have a safety fitness determination rule that is old and we know it, and it's on our list of things that we are going to update. And we are looking at ways that we can engage with motor carriers and drivers that don't necessarily involve enforcement. So enforcement is a big hammer, it's a big tool, and it's a useful tool when it will produce a safer outcome. But there are other things that we are looking at, like education, outreach, talking to companies, talking to drivers, getting a more connected relationship with our local law enforcement officers, with our local state agencies, so that we have a better understanding of what, all outreach, all of what we do, even though it's national, really, as you saw by the map, it's local. So what the experience of you in a state like Maryland versus Montana is going to be completely different, and the needs in those areas are different. So there's not one thing that we're doing, but there's a lot of things that we're doing. And enforcement is one of those tools. And where appropriate, we will use that tool. But we're also looking at other opportunities to expand our reach and our depth and our connection to motor carriers and drivers.
And I apologize, we have probably time for one more question because we have to be out of the room as well, but this gentleman here had already raised his hand.
Jamie Schultz, the owner operator. You guys mentioned as a comment, you're looking at 0 deaths. That's practically impossible to do. And you can't regulate that to where you're going to have 0 deaths to have nothing move. So I think that's a bad way to look at that. It's minimizing would be better, and I think we should be looking at that. The one thing that's coming up, and I know it's been talked about, is speed regulators, delimiters coming up, and a couple comments on that. The speed limits are the responsibilities of the state, not the federal government. So even when we had the 55 speed limit back in the 70s, for all of us that remember Schoolhouse Rock, we knew at that time it was unconstitutional for the federal government to pressure the states on that. And speed delimiters give no economic bearing on our industry. So under the Supreme Court, it still doesn't fit under the Commerce Clause. And governors will, in effect, make that a national speed limit. So why do you think that the governors is their federal responsibility and constitutional?
Thank you for that easy question on speed limiters. It is still on our unified agenda item that we're going to be moving forward with the rulemaking on speed limiters. We have drafted the notice of proposed rulemaking, or I guess it's a supplemental notice of proposed rulemaking to follow up on the original proposal that we put out in 2016. So we're still working on the speed limit rulemaking, and we think it's appropriate to do so. We think that it doesn't conflict with the state's authority to set speed limits, that this is just a technology to get the commercial motor vehicles to just slow it down a little bit and to just help us improve safety.
Why do you think that you can keep the truck from following state speed limits?
They're still required to obey the state. We have a federal rule that requires you to comply with state and local laws and regulations. So to the extent that you see a speed limit, you are required under our FMCSAs, if you're an interstate carrier, you are required to obey the state speed limits. But looking at the data and all the crash experience over the many years, we think that there's a certain maximum speed that no matter where you're going and what the state determined the speed limit ought to be, at a certain point, vehicles, the commercial vehicles, we just need to slow them down.
What's the basis of the constitutionality of this? That's what I'm asking.
Well, we don't have a legal debate here today, but clearly by the fact that we published those rulemakings.
You can't make rules and laws that are unconstitutional.
right and clear, we don't think it's unconstitutional that what we're doing. We're just opening it up for public comment, and once we publish that supplemental notice of proposed rulemaking, we strongly encourage you to send in your comments and whatever legal argument you want to present. We'll make sure our lawyers are working with us in responding to that once you send in those written comments to us. But on your first point about the National Railway Safety Strategy, I definitely want to address that. When I laid out our safe system approach, that what we're looking at is all the fatal crashes that are happening. Out of all of those, one or more of those things that we highlighted in that safe system approach does apply, so we will not accept the fact that people have to die on the roadway. That's not what we're accepting. We're saying long-term, we are going to keep pushing towards zero, because each and every one of those fatalities could have been prevented, whether it's fastening a seatbelt, slowing down, people not driving while they're distracted. In each and every one of those fatalities, something could have been done. One or more of those factors played in, and it could have been prevented. So we want to save every single life. We know it's going to take many, many years, but we're committed to doing it. Oh, Todd standing up. I think Todd has something to say.
Thank you. Actually, because I know we're out of time, so I'll be really, really brief. From my awareness of the way insurance works, they pay claims based on crashes and lawsuits and all kinds of other really not smelly stuff. Having said that, they make their analysis looking at real data. And they know, and I know the agency knows, that experienced drivers are far safer, far less likely to crash. So from a public positive perspective, it ought to be our joint goal to find the ways to reduce turnover among the driving population. When you're always consistently putting new people behind the wheel, no matter how good the training may be, and right now I suspect there's a lot of it that's not very good, but they don't know what they don't know, and they can have accidents, get in bad situations. But what I did here a second ago is a substitute for actual safety data was putting supposed safety technologies on vehicles that can create the illusion of we take safety seriously when maybe the crash data doesn't support that at all. So I guess my question is, before we recommend or quasi-recommend or imply that this stuff will somehow make us look safer, why don't we actually look at real data about where this technology is used, and is there any real improvement in highway safety? And that's all the stuff. That's all the stuff. I mean, the discussion is going on now about automatic braking and things like that. Well, I know there are carriers out there that have this stuff on their equipment. Does it work?
Yes, it does work. We have actual data, and you will see a report later this year that shows upwards of 40% reduction of vehicle fleets that install automatic emergency braking technology on their trucks. And Todd, I appreciate it, and I do not disagree with you. Actual data is a foundation of the rulemakings that we publish, and I work very closely, my team works very closely with Larry in regulatory development. And you know, the Office of Management and Budget is very particular when we send over proposals to them, and they critique and look very closely at the data and analysis used to support those rulemakings, because cost-benefit analysis and a net safety benefit is one required element of putting out any rule.
Some in our community think that if driver turnover was a measurement of safety, and it should be when we're talking about safety ratings and things like that.
Yes, absolutely, and we've had this discussion, and your team has been at the Driver Compensation Committee discussions. That's another issue. Detention time study we're involved in, truck leasing task force. So I think there's a lot of alignment with your point and what we're trying to get done.